Welcome to episode 9, everyone. Welcome to the Vinh and Ali podcast. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Vin. How are you? Merry Christmas for our Christmas episode.
Merry Christmas. This is Christmas Eve, which is kind of crazy. Before we jump into this book,
episode 9.
This book we're doing it's called Catch of the Decade. And before we jump into it, last time, what I find hilarious, which I just want to log into this podcast so I'd never forget it. Ali and I logged on to do a podcast 2 days ago. We haven't had a chat in about 2 weeks. We ended up talking for 2 to 3 hours instead of doing the podcast. So this is the second attempt of doing the podcast.
Well, I know. This book's getting some decent time. Congratulations to the guys who wrote it and Catch of the Decade. I'm excited to jump into this one. It's going to be fun.
As we always do when we're talking about books, we tend to give it a bit of a metaphor. I tend to go for food. This one was an interesting one for me. This one was like eating a dish that I've never eaten before, but all the flavors were extremely familiar. So it was super strange. I remember being in Malaysia in Penang once, and I was eating this soupy dish, and it was a brand new dish, never had it before, but the flavors tasted so familiar. And what I mean by that metaphorically is, like I was saying to Ali, I felt like while reading this book, Ali and I, or for me, I felt like I was reading my own story minus the $1 billion exit. That's how it felt for me. Just because everything these guys did in this story, this book was such a powerful. It captured their story so brilliantly, and yeah, we're just minus $1 billion. Yeah,
I did love your message when we started reading it. You're like, hey man, we kind of like these guys, just minus the $1 billion.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, maybe our $1 billion is just 10 years away because, like we said, these guys they're a bit older than us, so we've got a bit of time.
Yeah, I don't know. $1 billion sounds like a lot. It's too many tokens.
Tell me, what did this book mean to you? What's your metaphor before we go into this book of what this meant to you?
I think it was really interesting. I loved your comment about it feeling really familiar. The thing that really stood out, we've both read hundreds of business books. The bit that I loved the most about this book is these guys are local. Like when I was reading this story, like they were doing this down the road, like 5-10 minutes away. And I love their story about it's an awesome rags to riches, local, homegrown entrepreneurial story. And I think we've got some amazing Australian entrepreneurs, but very few of them, I think, have written books like this. So I think when I was reading it, it really resonated. And especially just being in the Melbourne entrepreneurial scene, like you see some of the names that are mentioned in the book and you've met these people, like it's phenomenal. And then to see just like how they went about it and how candid they are in speaking about the experience, like there was a real element of genuineness and authenticity to the way that it was written. So I think that resonated. And it was probably the first business book I've read in a while where I was like taking notes and really into it just from that level. So
I reckon I was about halfway through the book. I read this book in 2 sittings, which is generally rare for me. Generally, for me to finish a book, it takes 4 to 5 sittings, right? But I finished this in 2, and each sitting was about 2.5 hours. And I haven't read a book in a very long time where I actually stopped to take notes and to set goals for 2021.
Yeah, that's huge.
There was something about it's hard to say that a book is inspiring. I mean, music can be inspiring for me because auditory gets me going. A movie sometimes can be really inspiring, but words sometimes it has more difficulty with me in particular to be inspiring. Dude, I wrote goals down when I was reading this. It was
awesome.
It was brilliant. I love it.
All right, well, jump in. What was the first thing that stood out?
Well, the way they wrote this book, I really liked it because they told their story, and then at the end of each kind of section, there's like a massive list of the lessons that they want to reiterate to make sure that you didn't, let fall through the cracks. So if I go to that section, the first one that I really connected with that they spoke about was don't let your passions for a product cloud your commercial judgment. Give the customers what they want, not what you want.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think that is the classic problem with an entrepreneur. Is that we are so madly in love with something that we want our customers to want what we want them to want.
Yep.
And that is the primary reason why some of the journeys or some of the ventures that I went on, they failed, is because I so badly wanted the customers to want what I want in the way that I wanted it. I didn't understand the importance of customer feedback at all. I just, classic entrepreneur first mistake was I went, oh, well, they're stupid for not wanting this.
I've created an amazing product.
Yes. and because I am a bit of a kind of, I love to tinker on things and, really build things. That really stood out to me because that's where I go wrong often. I get so busy building and making it perfect, and I do that in a vacuum without any external feedback, that once I finish, not only am I attached to it because of the sunk cost kind of concept, but I love it now because I've built this thing from scratch. So it's so dangerous. And I think it's such a powerful lesson, especially for those who are budding entrepreneurs just jumping into the game early.
Yep. Yeah. I loved one of their lines at the beginning. It's like, we sell people shit they don't need at prices they can't resist. like if you're talking about a business plan and a vision statement.
That's brilliant.
That's going to be one of the best ones.
Any business plan that has the word shit in there I'm in.
Great taglines.
Well, but that's almost kind of what you're doing as well, Ali, with Future Golf, right? I mean, not that, but you're helping. It just felt very similar to the concept that they were going for, is solving a problem that these businesses had by helping them repackage something they already have.
Yeah, I think they were very much an unused inventory kind of model where they were delivering a established service product that existed already, but doing it with a different spin. And I agree, like on that side, we're really similar in the fact that we do that with golf clubs. Is how do you build, like there's two sides to it, right? Like in one way, they were kind of a marketing platform to get those products out there, but also then for a new audience to then use those products packaged with value. So that I think resonates very strongly when reading their story around, how do you think about it differently? Like there's lines in the book where I think, which really stood out to me, where they were talking about, well, when they were trying to build Catch of the Day, one of the things they kept getting from all of the suppliers is, we don't sell to online. We only sell to bricks and mortars. But in their heads, they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why don't you guys sell online? Like that seems like something very odd, given that we've got thousands of people that we could sell your product to just because of tradition or how it's always been done. And I love that concept of how they really challenged something that was established and then turn that around. And that's what felt really similar to what we've done with golf. It's like, well, traditionally golf's always been played this one way. Well, why is that? Why can't we change it up a little bit? And then in time you get traction and everyone's like, oh yeah, this makes sense now.
I mean, worse than that. I mean, the way they wrote it, it's almost as if those retailers look down on them. Like you're just this kind of silly online thing that's not going to work out. And then I think, you're
on the
right.
Internet, like this internet thing will never last.
But it was interesting to see them push through that in such a. One of their lines when they started was saying that when you've been through the adversities we've been through, a negative comment, you not liking what we do, you telling us no, that's nothing, right? I actually highlighted that. I thought that was a brilliant thing that they said. I'm gonna find it.
You hear that in a lot of entrepreneurial stories, though. It's nearly when you use something and you feel like something's good, but a few people tell you that this is never going to work or no one's ever going to like it. It nearly becomes a driver, I think, in a lot of great entrepreneurial stories. And they definitely had it. One of the things that really stood out when I was reading it from your perspective was when they were selling at the market. And I know I was just imagining you piping up when you saw that. So you've done it. Tell us a little bit about your story.
That's the bit when I messaged you, was when they were selling things at the markets, at the Sunday markets, because we have a place in South Australia like that as well. We call it the Jeps Cross Markets. So it opens on Sundays and you have to get there at like 3 a.m. to line up in the car park. And I had stock from China. So when I was 19, I flew to Guangzhou with one of my cousins with $40,000 of my dad's life savings. And I went to this it's the Canton Fair, where all the electronic suppliers from around China come to one place. and you get to walk through this place where it's like 50 football fields and it's non-stop electronics. And then I bought a container of electronics back to Australia. And to me, I had a shop front, which I hired at the time, which then got closed down because all of the electronic products I was selling didn't have CE approval. And then when they shut down that store, I didn't know where else to go. So then the next place I went to was the Sunday markets. Yeah. So I remember borrowing my uncle's van. My family have a grocery store. So we used that van, lined up in the Jeps Cross Sunday markets thinking no one's going to buy any of this. No one has any money at these places. We're not going to be able to sell anything. And we lined up, we got a spot. First day on the Sunday market, we made $11,000 cash. It was insane because we didn't realize all these ethnic families that go to these places, they had wads of 50s rolled up in their pockets. And we were selling, mobile phones that could receive TV reception really poorly. And then we had like these little heart-shaped photo things where you can load 10 photos on there as a key ring. So we sold so many different things. And it was crazy how much money you could make there. We came back for 6 months nonstop. We made more money there than we made in a proper shop front. Yeah, because we were selling something there that nobody else was selling. Most people were selling secondhand goods or really crappy stuff, whereas we brought in really cool electronics. And I mean, they didn't last very long. A few weeks later, people came back for refunds, and we were like, "This is the flea market. There's no such thing as a refund here.
There's no receipts here. Yeah.
There's no receipts here."
You buy your own risk.
I learned so many lessons there, in terms of, how to deal with that, for example, how to, so it really resonated when they talked about that. That's also where I built a lot of thick skin. That's where I learned a lot of my entrepreneurial skills.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. Like that, and I think for a lot of migrants and, first generation people and entrepreneurs, I think this story will really resonate with them, where it is that concept of, all right, well, hard work, let's try something a little bit different. Like I love in their story, it's like, I think one of the brothers would go and get there really early, like that hustle and that work ethic of getting the best spot and then spruiking whatever the product was.
And I did that because Gabby, was it Gabby? Yeah, Gabby's the talkative one. Yeah. Gabby was the one that was, jumping up and just getting people to come to their stalls, right? Dude, I did the same thing. I did very similar thing. I was the spruiker, and man, it's crazy.
Yeah, I love it. That's
what's one of the things you took away that you really liked? I mean, I like I said, the book they wrote it in such a great way in terms of all the lessons are at the end of a section, all the lessons at the end of a section. So I just went through the sections again, kind of highlighting the ones that stood out to me the most. And it's fun one to talk about.
Yeah, I think, and that's just a really interesting thing about this book is that there's so many practical takeaways with those lessons. So if anyone is listening out there that wants to start something or looking at getting a venture out there, I think this is a pretty decent handbook and guidebook of how to go about it and to nearly replicate their journey at different stages. But the one that I liked, I love the concept of mazal. I'd never heard that before. And they've got like a little diagram within the book that maps it out. But the whole concept is it's a combination of location, learning, and timing. And I think on a broader scale, they're talking about how do you make your own luck through action and effort. And I think that bit really stood out there. So just as a mental model nearly around those combinations. And it just really resonated because I think for everyone who experienced, say, luck or opportunity, those three conditions are usually met, whether it is location, learning, or timing. And just being aware of that and them sort of putting it in that framework was something that I think's quite a cool practical tip.
Do you have an example where Mazal happened? Where you were able, can you share an example where those three elements were hit?
Yeah, well,
and then it felt lucky.
Yeah, well, I think meeting Chantal, my wife, I think that's meeting our loved ones is always, I think, an element of mazal, right? Like I was at that time, we were at university, we're working doing market research in a call center in this job that just was there to pay the bills. And again, so like all the conditions of, I was trying to, I guess, learn and get some money and at uni and trying to develop a new skill. So that's the learning part. Location, being in that workplace, being in that environment at the time, getting sat next to each other during a shift, and then timing, right? Like that's where I think the luck really plays its places in timing. But we all have that. But I think with nearly everything to do with luck, like say even if you win the lotto, you still have to go buy the ticket, right? Like you can't win it without buying the ticket. So that being aware of, all right, which actions am I taking and what could these actions then turn into is something really interesting. And sometimes I think it's easy to get really logical. It's like, all right, well, I need to plan every single move. I need to do this, this, and this, which is great because that provides a foundation. But then the other side of that is I think the really cool, special things that happen in life, they feel like they happen in this nearly Mazal framework where it's like, all right, well, I did 90% of the things that were part of my plan, but it was really that unexpected conversation or bumping into that person or getting sat next to them on a flight. Like everyone's got that story of the unexplainable one that they didn't really see coming, but had a really big impact.
Well, you described the location and you described the timing, right, of how you met Chantel. How about the learning component? How does that come into play with that situation?
Yeah, thanks for calling me out on that one. That was nice and weak. Yeah.
No, it's not weak. I think that's super awesome that you use that as an example, right? It's just, well, like you said, Mazal it was location, it was learning, and then what was the third one again? Location, learning, and
timing.
Timing, that's right. Location, learning, and timing equals kind of that Mazal, which is in a sense like luck, right? So how does learning?
I think the learning there would have maybe factored in like in that example, being younger and actually taking the plunge off trying to balance uni with the job and learning that new skill. But then also I think learning about relationships, like being in that environment. That was probably the first time being in a big team environment, lots of young people working together. Maybe that's kind of the learning in that situation. But I think a lot of the learning actually happened post the Mazal in that experience is once you end up in the relationship and you get married. But
well, I want to dissect this concept of Mazal more so that I want to gain a deeper understanding of it. Because I didn't highlight that. And I'm just trying to remember back. Were they saying that Mazal is something that happens when learning is sufficient, your timing is done well, and you're in the right place?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So, and then they used a few different examples like that were business related.
Okay.
Right. So I'm trying to find one here where, like, say for example, like maybe on an entrepreneurial standpoint, Mazal would be, okay, I've read a book and it talks about a marketing strategy. So I've learned something. And then we're going to put it out there, see what happens. That would be the location, putting it out on the website or taking it to the market. And then the timing would be the world's biggest production supplier walks past, sees you out there testing your new marketing strategy at the market and says, hey, Vin, wow, what an amazing product that you've imported from China. I want to buy 1 million of them. You know, now that's probably a better example of Mazal in action, but it's maybe the concept of getting some new information, taking action on it, putting it somewhere, and then
there's also that undercurrent of application there that applies too.
For sure.
Yeah, because that's the thing. That's why learning and location is so important, right? Because you can just learn and then not do anything with it. Which reminds me, you know, because my background is magic and I used to spend a lot of time with magicians. That's something that I see in my own, well, you know, I haven't been involved in the magic world for a very long time, but when I used to gather with a group of magicians, what I'd notice is most of them would just learn for the sake of learning, and there was no real application of it. It's why a lot of them didn't have thriving magic careers, not because they weren't capable, but just because they loved learning more than the application side.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, especially if what you want is to have a thriving magic career, or you want to have a career in whatever area you're an expert in, there's also that application side that you have to really focus on. because if you don't apply what you learn, yeah, you're just acquiring knowledge, right? Again, it just reminds me of what Bruce Lee said. One of Bruce Lee's things that he really is an advocate for is don't just learn for the sake of learning. Don't just be the acquirer of knowledge. You've got to apply what you learn.
Yep.
So I love that. I love the learning location. I love that. And also timing. I'm just trying to think of an example for me as well. See, for me, I can think of an example that hits those three things immediately. And that's how I started my speaking career. So I took a lot of time learning how to become a better presenter and a better performer. And then I spoke at a location, it happened because it was just serendipity. Someone goes, oh, hey, I want you to speak at this event. And then the person who asked me to speak arranged for a speaking agent to be in the audience when I spoke. So then it was just this beautiful kind of, and I felt so lucky that day, but I didn't know the other forces were at play. I didn't think about it as, if I didn't learn all the things I learned, I wouldn't have gotten to that location. And if I didn't meet that mentor of mine, then I wouldn't have got that opportunity. And if he didn't invite somebody else, I wouldn't have been there. So it's interesting to see that at play now when you reflect.
Yeah. Well, this is just as you were saying that. Can you create mazal, or can it only be viewed in hindsight?
Well, I feel like now this is going to sound a bit woo-woo, right? in the Vietnamese culture, there's a word we use. We said "go yuing," right? Go yuing. It's very difficult to say. Can you just try saying it just for fun? Go yuing.
Go yuing.
Whoa! That was pretty good. Okay. So Go yuing means that all the components of the universe have come together to create the fate of what just happened. So you met your wife. They say that there was enough yuing there for you and your wife to have met. So when something doesn't happen in the Vietnamese culture, we say, oh, that's because there wasn't enough yuing. Right. Yeah. Those people come yuing, right, means where they don't have enough of that force. So to me, I feel like the three elements that the boys in this book wrote about when you talk about location, timing, and learning, those are the things you can control to hopefully allow that force to occur. Does that make sense? So you can't control the yuing, you can't control that, but you can control the other elements, the learning, the location, and the timing to some extent.
Yeah. Well,
and then
location
just
and learning you can control fully, right? Like, not fully, but you can get a lot more control about location and probably learning. I think timing's a very interesting one because everyone always asks about timing. And I think, to me, timing is about intuition. And then you link intuition just based on maybe collective knowledge again that you can then act on at a certain point in time, which is really interesting, the concept of timing.
But see, timing to me... Well,
yeah, sorry.
Go for it.
No, like I think timing is something that's really interesting because we can kind of feel when timing conditions are met. Like when we make the right decision, say whether it's with work or a business or a relationship, whatever it is, like there's a gut feel that's like, oh, well, this feels pretty good, or this feels a little bit uncertain, or this feels a bit off. But it's very hard to describe how we then decide to act on timing as a concept. Like,
well, to me, timing is just, I view it as something different. Whereas it sounds like you're saying timing is you're being very strategic when you attempt something, right? For me, timing is attempt many times, and one of those times will be the right timing.
The right timing. Yeah.
Does that? Yeah. Well, and I know not every business can do that because you don't have unlimited resources. You can't just always try. But to me, timing is something where if you're only trying once, then you won't benefit from timing. To me, you have to try multiple times, and then one of those times, your timing will be correct.
I'm picturing us boxing, right? Whereas you're just punching the whole time, and you're like, I'm going to land one of these punches.
And I'm really weak.
Oh my God, just standing there. It's like just trying to wait for one knockout punch. That's kind of the image that came up in my. Yeah.
But that's a really cool analogy to think of, is that I will try multiple, and that's kind of similar in the businesses that we run. It's like I will aim for many projects that are smaller in nature, whereas you've got like a bigger kind of ultimate goal, right? So it's kind of interesting to see that come up in areas of our lives. But to me, I'm someone who has to, again, this is how I view problem solving. Mm-hmm. If X plus 9 equals 10, most people know that X equals 1, right? Because if X plus 9 equals 10, you solve for X, which is 1. Like it's very straightforward. Whereas for me,
calculus lecture.
No, this is a very simple algebra. It's not even calculus. You didn't even know that. But to me, that's a very simple algebra equation. However, to me, I could never see that X equaled 1. And what I would have to do is plug in every single number and then see it like that. So if X plus 9 equals 10, I have to go, I'll put 2 there. And I go, wait, no, that equals 11. That doesn't work. I'll put 3 there. Wait, that equals 12. That doesn't make sense. I'd have to plug in every single number I can there and then finally hit, it's 1.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So to me, that's how I approach life. That's how I approach entrepreneurship. I solve for the variable that is unknown by just plugging sometimes random things in there. Sometimes it's not even an educated guess. So like earlier this year, it's like, okay, well, you're not happy. Well, let's read some books on how to be happier and how to have more joy in your life. Let's take that, plug it in. Let's try it to see if it works. Mm-hmm. That didn't work. Take it out, try another one. To me, the game of entrepreneurship or the game of life is really just a game of solve for X. And I think sometimes people get so caught up in getting the right answer that they don't try a bunch of different numbers. They don't try a bunch of different solutions quickly. And that's something that these guys write about. It's don't get hung up on the failures or the errors. Just iterate, try new things and keep moving. And I feel like the way that these guys were able to grow so fast in their business was that they were iteration kings, man. They just take this, try this, doesn't work, out the door. Take this, try this, doesn't work, out the door. Take this, try this. And it's just this constant, let's not take things personally. Let's not dwell on these. This is just the nature of the world that we live in. And I love that approach is, they spent rarely any time feeling sorry for themselves and go, damn, we failed that online campaign. Let's kind of sit and dwell about it. It's on to the next one.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought of. I thought of that algebra equation. Just plug in another number. That doesn't work. Plug in another number. Doesn't work. Do the same thing again.
There's so much gold in what you were just saying. Like, I love that concept of solve for X. Like that's such a new, I think you've just created something new there. Like, and it's something that I've seen you do over and over again, where you are you treat life like a scientist, where you will test multiple experiments until you find what fits right. So, and that's a really cool practical lesson, and even as we head into the next year, like I think that's a nice note-taking one where it's think about all the things that you might want to experiment with and try multiple times and do that. Like, don't just walk away because you've tried once and it's failed or, which can be a natural reaction because we don't, a lot of us are uncomfortable with failure. So that was a really cool concept. I loved you also then bringing it back to how many times they iterated like that. That just resonated. Like if I look at like our entrepreneurial story was so similar. And I was just thinking then, I don't think we've ever had a negative conversation in 6 years because we tried something that didn't work or a mistake was made because it's so really detached. It's more about trying, like you have to try it to unlock the good thing. And if I look at the thousands of actions that have taken, it's the only way you get progress. And there's some amazing books on this. Like one of the first entrepreneurial books that I read was called The Lean Startup, which really got me thinking like that, where it's around iteration. And it's not like what you were talking about where we have that tendency of, all right, well, I'll just go build the perfect product. And because I'm a genius. Everyone's going to like it. The Lean Startup was, it's an amazing book around, all right, well, no, you just keep testing and then you see how your users are looking at it, how your customers are looking at it. Does it work? Does it need further iteration? And in its simplest terms, I think that's really the game of entrepreneurship. It's this constant iteration, testing, trying, evaluation, and then going again. And these guys did it at a pretty elite level. They did it quickly. Yeah. They didn't have ego attachment to it. They let the bad ones go. They went again.
And it was so cool that they were brothers and they were able to build this together and exit the business at the end of the day, still loving and caring about each other. That's so rare, you know, because building businesses like this far out, like the ego that is involved. Yeah. It's just amazing to see them navigate it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you're family.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they said it made it easier because of the underlying unconditional love they had for each other, which was really cool. I thought that was really cool. And how money was never a thing between them. And I think that is brilliant. That's usually it's money that gets in between people. Usually it's kind of that, I want more or I want more that causes the problem. Yeah. But again, to stay on that Mazal topic, something that I wrote down, this is, I guess, wisdom point number 31. They wrote, to build a business, you need to be out and about, socialize, attend events, travel, circulating increases your chances of being in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. This is so true. I see my friends who run much bigger businesses than I see them do this all the time. And then when big deals happen, it's so interesting because I used to see it as, man, this person's so lucky. That person's so lucky. They just signed a $4 or $5 million deal. Yeah. And now, I guess with a bit more age, I feel like I can see the matrix. You know how in the Matrix, Neo gets to a point where he can see the code? I feel like I can see some of it now, and it's not luck. It's because they build relationships. It's because they do these, they go to those events, they fly to this place, and they don't go there with the intention of, I'm trying to close this deal. They go there just to build the relationship and to ensure that they're popping up. Yep. They're there at the right time. They're there at the location. Oh, that didn't work. That's okay. But that contributes to the next time. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like, it's almost like everything you do matters. Because everything you do is leading up towards something. Yep. Yeah. I'm trying to find an analogy for it, but it's like everything you do ultimately matters. Yeah. Especially if it's aligned. Like I think one of the things that you hear in so many books, it's exactly what you said, is location does play a pretty big impact. Like if you were living in Silicon Valley over the last 10, 15 years, the odds of you being connected to a fast growth tech startup is going to be higher than if you're living in even New York, or you're living in Melbourne, or you're living in Tokyo, or wherever it is. So, and then attending those events, like it's in so many stories. I went to this expo, I went to this convention, I went to my trade fair, I joined this network, I was part of a mastermind, I went to uni and shared a room with this person. They lived like that. That component does play a pretty significant role. Huge role. And even the other one, like that talks about just, I think what you're nearly leading to there as well is like little actions, small actions of connection, where one that stands out is I love the Kevin Hart story of when he was up and coming. He had, I think, a team, and at every gig they would leave a business card of his with his name and his email address at every single gig. And they did it at thousands of gigs, but that's what ultimately built up his email database so that he had his own captive audience as his career grew. Like that's a pretty high intensive, small task, repetitive role that he kept doing for a long period of time that then would have resulted to some mazal, and opportunities and being able to, I guess, elevate himself to the next level. It's why they say that slow progress is still progress. And slow progress is slow progress is the starting process of massive momentum, right? it's how, when you look at people like Kevin Hart, you go, wow, this person has such huge momentum. And this is, I'm almost saying this to remind myself of it, is that if I want to experience bigger amounts of momentum again, like I did when I was in the US, I have to start the ball rolling again by doing all those small actions.
Yeah.
And I think often we forget that it's the small actions that lead to the larger amounts of momentum. And it just makes sense, right? I mean, when you're starting to push the ball, it's slow as, like, I just imagine pushing something that is freaking huge. The first time you go to push it, it's going to start at like 1 kilometer an hour.
Yeah. And
it takes time. And as you just keep doing those small tasks, those small actions, it just builds power, builds momentum, time. Yeah.
And
it's cool.
And I really fundamentally hate that it's true, but like I've always been so into productivity and high impact and efficiency. Like I love trying to see what's the most direct route to an outcome. And
right.
Like it's nearly like a pre-programmed shortcut mentality. But what I've realized is that anything that's good takes time. Like there is no way of going around it. Like you can still have that productive shortcut mentality, but you have to then still utilize that for a long period of time to create anything that's significant. But there is just no shortcut to anything that's, I think, highly valuable or deep that can be done in a very short period of time. Just yet to see it. I don't know if you've seen it.
And the reason I think it takes time is because it has to be refined. Everything has to be refined by the customer in the market, right? Mm-hmm. It shows the importance of those iterations, because each time these guys, even in this book, they were making an iteration, it was based on them tracking the results. Mm. Whereas when you build something in a vacuum, there's no way you can build something near perfect. You have to start bad and then refine along the way. That's why things take time to become great. It's why us as people, it's why, people listening now, you as a human being, it takes time for you to become an amazing person. We don't start off as amazing. I think we start off as kind of terrible. And then over time, we get better and better and better if we work at it.
Yep.
And that's the thing. It's like there are times, like I had a thing happen earlier this week where Paywan and I just went out grocery shopping, and that thing where you go to the grocery store and you're trying to find a park, and then inevitably you have someone that thinks they saw the parking spot first, but you were the one waiting the entire time. Have you had this experience?
Yeah, well, every time, Christmas shopping, this is the number one experience.
It brings out the worst in people. And then, so I was there waiting, and then this car kind of rolls up and takes the spot, right? Yeah. And I kind of got upset. So, I beat them and went, hey, wait, what the hell's going on? Yeah. And like, I was just kind of going, hey, that was our spot. This person lost it. Like they lost it. They lost it. They lost the plot and was getting really aggressive. I was like, oh, well, all right, we'll go find another one. And then I just went, man. And then, you try to have empathy. You go, oh, maybe that person really needs to buy a Christmas present or whatever.
Yeah.
But it just made I couldn't shake the feeling. I go, why are some people such monsters? Why are some people so horrible? And to me, the reason I'm even saying this is what clicked is that if you don't iterate as a human being, I'm not saying that person was ultimately a horrible person, but I'm just saying that, look, let's face it, there are people out there in the world that are just absolute monsters. And there are those people out there who are just absolute beautiful angels. Mm-hmm. And I think I live somewhere in between. And the reason I think we're all kind of, in a way, we start off, if we're not shaped, if we don't iterate as a human being, we'll become a monster. Mm. You become just taking it away from entrepreneurship for a second. I think the monsters that live out there, it's because they don't iterate. It's because they don't solve for X, and then you end up being a freaking monster. I don't know where I was going with that, but I just had that in the back of my mind. That was really bothering me.
I'm glad you got it out. We'll look at the CCTV footage, and it's just like you've just rocked up. That poor person's been waiting for like 5 minutes. You start beeping aggressively at them, like that's.
But that's the point of it is, I think as people, we also need to iterate. We become more refined as we grow, right? And as you become more refined and you learn more and you go, you reflect and you go, what was wrong? And you become better. You yourself need to go through the process of almost entrepreneurship because it makes you a better person.
Well, look, I love trying different things. We speak about it all the time around being curious and all that. And I think one of the really interesting things with, say, entrepreneurship, for example, is it's a lot of the time the focus is on what's been created. That business, and then it's measured on how successful it is, whether it's done this revenue or sold for this amount, or it's got that narrative to it. But if you look at it fundamentally, I just really believe that the art, like entrepreneurship is an art, and then it's more of a personality or personal development tool. It teaches you such a variety of things about yourself and how to interact with others, and then how that then manifests into a product. And I think that's the thing, even whether you're the founder or whether you've worked in a startup or something that's been created from nothing, people drive on that energy because they're learning so much about themselves, the challenges, the difficulties, overcoming, iterating. And then I think that iteration that happens within, say, the business or the service also then happens personally for all of the individuals that are then involved with it, because it's something that tests you on an extreme level. Like I love that SAS show where they go through the boot camp, and that's more of like a physical and mental type of test. But I think people really love those types of experiences because they're like, oh, I'm absolutely spent by the end of it, but I learned so much about myself. But it happened through this course, having to go through SAS training or whatever it was. Kind of feels like entrepreneurship has an element of that. Or if you go to university and you complete a degree, it's like, I had to go through that thing, but I got the degree, but really I learned about how to manage that, how to get through uni, how to live life off 2-minute noodles. Like I love things in life that have that component to it.
What the component you're talking about, do you mean challenging experience?
It's like challenging. It's like the unknown. It's having to do things outside your normal comfort zone. It's having those moments of like failure and hardship, and then having those moments of like joy and, like that feeling of, wow, we really accomplished something. Like, I think that's the real rich part of that journey, which sometimes it gets lost when we work in teams or we work on projects or we work in businesses where so much of the focus is just around what it is and the outcome.
Well, remember what we said as well, like when we were chatting last time when we were meant to do the podcast, we were saying how the first 3 quarters of the book were super exciting. And then the last quarter of the book, when they were preparing for sale and everything was a lot easier, it was a lot more boring. And I really related to that because I went, wow, it's so true how it's those challenges that are exciting. That's the part where I stopped to write down goals and got really excited. But when it got to the parts where it becomes a bit easier, in inverted commas, easier, it wasn't as exciting. And while you were saying that, I wonder if, it's been embedded in my head, and I think it's probably from my parents and the way they work, is that you work hard your whole life and then you take it easy once you retire. Whereas again, this is back to one of our earlier podcasts of lifestyle design from Tim Ferriss, where it's really about, it made sense to me. Maybe it's about resting and then finding challenging experiences and then resting and then finding challenging experiences, meaning work and then retire within a year, then work again and then retire within the year. I feel like that resonated when you said it before in a way that it hasn't resonated before. Whereas, because I always think that it's about this or the other. It's either it's like, this is a question I have for you. Do you just constantly live at a 7, or do you pursue a 9 or a 9.5 and then you be okay with like a 3 or a 4, and then you pursue a 9 or a 9.5 later in the year and then you're okay with a 3 or a 4?
Yeah. It's I think it's the unanswerable question, right? Because there's so many different ways to live. Like, you can live life very extreme, where you can live for 1s and 10s and then deal with the upside. Like I think about when in my uni days and when you're partying a lot, you're doing all of that. It felt like that. Like you've got tens and you've got ones that happen a lot. Whereas I think it also depends at different stages in life. Like if I look at it now, because I've got so many things that I'm involved with that have a high level of uncertainty, is I like to keep the core of life probably more close to, a more stoic 7, where it's a bit more balanced. So internally, so that it can deal with the external volatility that then naturally takes place. So that would be my model at the moment, but I don't think it's a perfect model either. Like I'll then be exploring, looking at changing that. But I think the other thing is not being too fixed with these bits and pieces. Like what you were mentioning there is you're just presenting a different model, which is, the mini retirement model. Take 2 months off, detach. Some people that will work with them. Some people it won't. Because in theory they might do that, but they'll have the laptop. It won't be true detachment. So again, it depends at what stage in life they're at, what your circumstances look like. But I think thinking about different ways to live is something that's very important.
Well, something they wrote that kind of echoes that is, if you're trying to solve a problem and you can't solve it, it means you're following the rules and you may need to break the rules. Does that make sense? In terms of don't be afraid to break the rules. I think that's what they were saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which again is like there are these hidden rules in life where we think we're meant to live a certain way. Don't be afraid to break those rules that have been taught to you by your parents and then your grandparents, etc.
Well, let's dig deeper into this, because I think this goes to risk taking. Like if I look at rule breaking and risk taking, I'd nearly put them in the same category. Yeah. And if I've spoken to, like you just see that concept, especially say in entrepreneurship, where there is always in the good stories, there's a component of rule breaking and risk taking. Like whether it's Richard Branson, I think he was smuggling his records across the border in Europe, or it's Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak developing that thing where they could make free international phone calls or whatever it is. Like there's always this story. I think Nike started by lying about having a company to get their first order of Dunlops or whatever it was when it started. Like there's always this concept that you wouldn't say is morally or potentially ethically the right move, but it's like this small little risk that maybe turns into something quite big. And then you hear the other stories where that goes too far and they end up in jail. So it's like, where is, it seems like there's a fine line between being like Enron and being Apple. Yeah.
Why do you think that rule breaking is? Well, why do you think rule breaking is such an important part of entrepreneurship?
I think it's because entrepreneurship is largely about differentiation. It's about doing something that hasn't existed in its exact format before. And in a lot of society, there are pretty solid structures that maybe don't promote full and true differentiation for a lot of good reasons. Like we have laws, we have norms, we have societal norms. And I think especially the successful entrepreneurial stories, they have to sit outside that normal circle to an extent. And I think the only way that you can sit outside that circle is by testing the current norms and what is at the moment. So it's naturally a component there. And I think it also is a natural component of the entrepreneur. They're usually people that aren't happy with the status quo. Like 80% of stories will be, the entrepreneur was the disengaged student at school. They couldn't understand why everyone was there 9 to 5, why they had to learn that topic. Usually I think the entrepreneurial mindset is also linked to not going with the status quo. So that's probably where that happens.
I view it as the reason they have to break the rules is because they have to venture into the unknown. Because entrepreneurship is always, it's linked very closely to innovation, right?
Yeah.
Innovation is discovering something that hasn't been discovered before. It's doing something new, and how can you do something new with the rules that have kept us within a box. You have to. The only way to create something new is to break those rules. Is to adopt new rules, and I don't think entrepreneurship can exist without breaking the rules.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just, I don't think it can exist. It can't. It would suffocate.
And again, I go back to thinking about it as an art form. Like if you look at entrepreneurship as a form of creativity, it doesn't get that maybe acknowledgement because it seems like something so serious and structured. And when you actually look at a company entity, it's got this component of, it's just a business or whatever it is. But realistically, you're like entrepreneurship at its fundamentals is turning something that was largely imaginary and trying to manifest it into reality, right? So you're creating something. It's no different to writing a song or painting a picture that didn't exist there. And hence why it's got probably very similar success and failure rates, because you have to get a lot of things right for people to engage with that piece. And it's in a largely competitive environment. So that's where I think testing that norm really becomes important. And it's another cool, like, again, going back to practical takeaways, it's as you head into 2021, what's something that needs to be challenged? It doesn't necessarily be go break a rule or do something that's going to get you in trouble, but what's something that is either in your life, in your industry, in your workforce that's been done a certain way for a long period of time that needs to be challenged, and sit on that question for 20 minutes, 30 minutes and just see what ideas come, because I think that's, it can sometimes unlock some pretty cool things.
That's something I'm doing because I found a really cool. Well, I want to sit down and actually goal set 2021 with Pei Wen, my wife. And that's something that we're doing is review some of the equations we have in our lives. So-and-so plus so-and-so equals this, and then let's solve for X again. Let's review how we've been solving for X in 2020. And let's review it and let's actually challenge some assumptions and go, well, what can we actually do differently? And it's how can we optimize? How can we change it? And I think that's so important because we focus on doing this a lot in our businesses, but I want to bring some of this kind of thinking into my personal life. Mm-hmm. I think, we've been able to build some pretty cool businesses entrepreneurially, but how can we take these lessons, like even these lessons from this book here, and apply it to our personal lives? I think that imagine applying entrepreneurship to your personal life. That would actually be a really cool cool task. I think, how do we take these problem solving abilities we apply to the business world and apply it to our own damn lives?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I've been a big fan of that for the last 5-6 years, is starting with life strategy first and then the business or whatever the things are that we're doing being the add-ons rather than it being the other way. Because 100% agree with you around the fact that, and I saw this a lot even in the corporate world, where we spend so much time planning and strategizing for our professional lives. But then I saw that if you ask those same questions around what's your vision, what's the action plan, what's the strategy, what are your values, your culture, and you then apply that to people's personal lives, most of us struggle with answering those questions. We don't have a 2-3 page document that outlines our own strategy. And I think that that's something that's really critical, because when people are talking about, I don't feel aligned or I don't have clarity, it's like, well, do you have a strategy? Do you know where you're actually directing? Like what direction you're going in? Are you thinking about what that path looks like? And I was having this thought when you were speaking earlier as well, where so many people that you speak to feel like, I've just lived a life that isn't aligned with who I am. And I'm so far off track of where I should be. And I've made all these decisions and life's happened. And it's interesting when I think you really dig down to it, most of us are actually relatively close. Like it's very rare circumstances where I've spoken to somebody and it's like, I think you need to change everything because you've got so much off this wrong. Whereas when you actually sit down and dig deep, I think most of us, intuitively or through circumstance, somewhere between 60 or 80% is pretty good. And when you analyze it critically, it generally looks like it's like somewhere between 3 and 7 key moves that could be made that could either optimize that or could just change something. And it's usually based around some sort of blockage or conflict, a relationship, whether it's a working relationship, a career choice, a life choice, a habit that needs to be changed. Like, you see common themes that we all have, but it feels so much bigger when you're then going in there. And then I think a result of that is often anxiety and potentially, mental health implications around, well, I just feel so off. Like I should be here, but I'm not there. Whereas I think a lot of people are actually pretty close. It just needs some refinement and critical analysis and a little bit of, action planning to find that clarity.
What's really interesting is when you're a little bit off, but it feels like you're a massive part, like you're really off. When you're only, I just thought of an archery target. You feel like you are not even hitting the target, but in actual fact, you're only about 20% away from bullseye. But isn't it interesting how being 20% away from bullseye always feels like it's way off?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why does that? Because I really relate to what you're saying. Is that often, even when I talk to you or I will talk to some of my other friends, I say to them, "Oh, I'm feeling this," but they're like, "Yeah, but then it doesn't seem like you're off." But to me, it just goes, "Oh, I feel like, everything's terrible." Why is that? Why does that happen? Is it because the closer you get to the target, the more things are amplified? I mean,
well, I think things that aren't working are always over magnified versus things that are working. Yeah. So if you look at the concept of like gratitude and appreciation, is like it's very hard when we've got 90% of things that are working normally to really take stock and always be aware of what's good. But it's very easy for us to be aware to things that aren't working. And I think it's just based on our reptilian brain, where fear kicks in and the uncertainty. Like we are, as a species, just a lot more attuned to bad shit than we are to the good stuff. And that is just why I think it amplifies that feeling a little bit more.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. No, that's awesome. And I think if people spent this time really identifying what those 3 to 7 key things are, that can get them that extra little bit of the little bit closer to the target, it makes a huge difference. Like you said, for us, it was a very simple thing. When Pei-Wen and I made the decision to sit down at the beginning of each month to then map out what the next month looks like for us as a couple, as a family, as individual looks like, that was a game changer for us. It's simple, but man, far out. Don't discount the small things you can do that have such a big difference. Make such a big difference.
No, I think it's a really, and especially this time of the year. Again, we harp on it, but like one cool practical way of doing that. I love this exercise, and I love doing it at the end of the year, like between December 26th and the start of January, where you just take stock and you look through the camera roll, through a journal if you journal, and all the things, and just look at all the good things that happened. And finding all those, like the things that you took a photo of, or that you wrote about, or were really positive memories, or projects that you started, things that you learned, books that you read, and you get this really nice vivid list. It might be somewhere between 10 and 100 things. And then you can put that against some of the bad stuff that happens. And I think what it does, it just reduces the magnification when you see it on paper, when you can be like, it's very easy, especially in a pandemic year, to be like only bad things happened. But if you go through the exercise of actually doing the good too, it might just change the feelings, and it's a nice place to plan from.
Something really pragmatic you can do is, Pei-Wen and I want to do this. We do a month by month review of the good things that have happened. And one of the things we do when we do that is we look through the camera roll of the month by month. Yeah, because that helps re-jog your memory, right, of what's good month by month. And it's such a therapeutic thing to do with your partner, especially as well, is to go through, hey, let's do the highlights reel of this year, and then we weren't thinking about contrasting it with the negative, but I think that's actually a really cool idea too.
Yeah. And how cool is that when you look through the camera roll and you look through the good stuff, is it triggers, we should book in another one of these, or we should spend more time with that person, or I'd love to read another book, or whatever it is. It's a really cool action planning tool as well.
Well, what you're talking about, this is something you do in your business. You track everything. And since you've kind of come into my life, you've helped me track nearly everything in my life as well. And this is just applying the principles of entrepreneurship. And it almost seems like entrepreneurship is a way of life. You know how people who do martial arts say that martial arts is a way of life? I feel like entrepreneurship in itself is a way of life as well.
Yeah, I think it is. I think, well, if you look at it fundamentally, it's always looking about how to improve things and how to make things better. Like go back to the core fundamentals of the art form. That's what I believe it's about. So why not? Why would you do it in one area and then not do it somewhere else? I think it's like learning the most amazing thing you could ever learn about, but then you only use it for 4 hours a day. It's like, doesn't make too much sense. So I think that's an interesting one. Anyway, we went on our little rabbit hole. I like that.
Well, if we go back to the book for a moment, one thing that I was very impressed by with these guys is that how they were able to build multiple businesses. I mean, the number of businesses that they were building in a go was pretty crazy. They had the catch of the day, then they had the business about travel, then they also had the business for mums. It was just crazy to see how spread out they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I know I can't do that many things, but I think the reason I can't do it is because I don't understand how to run teams. I don't understand how to run different groups, different departments. To me, I'm a very solo entrepreneur. I've got maybe a team. The biggest I've ever had it was a team of 2 or 3. That's it. Yep. So it was just fascinating to see that side of business for me and how they had to learn how to manage people and then how culture became something that was very important. That's so foreign to me. Like to me, that just seems so scary and so difficult.
Yeah, and what they did was not the common story. Very few people have 4 or 5 successes to the level that these guys had it. So I think that it's unique, comparable, where even saying Australian entrepreneurship, can't think of too many others that would have done it multiple times. And I love this line that they had, which was idea by midnight, execute by midday. That's how they started Scoopon, which we know Scoopon became massive. It sold for a few $100 million. Like that was an idea that happened pretty much overnight. But I think the core thing that they were very good at is they had these principles of execution, and they used the learnings from the previous thing that they had developed and then incorporated that into the next one. So if you look at, say it starts with catch of the day as the core rock, then they launched, I think it was what became Menulog. They launched Scoopon. It wasn't
Menulog. It was, their version was Eat, right?
Eat Now, I think it was. So it started that it eventually got bought out.
Yeah.
But they were piggybacking, they were building layers off the back of Catch. So they already had the audience, they had the credibility, they had the tech know-how, and very much like a Google type of approach where I think it was Hezi would go off and nearly go into like the dark office and then come out with this new idea in a week or so that would then be launched and ready to go. I think it's cool. It's again, just they just stayed to the fundamentals of low cost, quick, fast, nearly low risk entrepreneurship, and then just put it out there and tried to see what would happen from it.
And the common thread there for me again is that they're solving for X and they can do it within an evening.
Yeah.
An idea for what X could be by midnight and then solved, plug it into the formula the very next day and try.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like it seems like, we can talk about all these different strategies that people document and all these different things. But at the end of the day, it just feels like entrepreneurship is a game of trial and error. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's just trying, doesn't work. No, let's try again. Trying a new idea, doesn't work. No, try again. It just feels like that is the core of all of it.
Yeah.
Is that you can't move away from that. And you can get a bit more clever with it, but people who can try trial and error faster tends to be the one that finds the winning solution ultimately. And this is a game where most people give up after a certain number of tries because it's bloody hard.
Yeah. Well, the concept that came up there was energy. We were speaking about this the other day. I think we were fleshing out an idea, and then we got really excited. And then that part of the brain where we're like, hey, this is going to be a lot of effort. Maybe let's not do it. Whereas I don't think these guys had that muscle of, oh, wait, they weren't, I don't know how to put it right, but it's when you've done this before a few times, you nearly get a little bit more risk averse and jaded because you know what you're in for. Whereas the first time, you don't know what you're in for. It's too late by the time you realize what you've signed up for.
Well, that's funny you say that, because at the beginning of my journey, when you start your journey as an entrepreneur, I remember, like, no matter who I met, I was like, you guys got to get into entrepreneurship. It's amazing. And now when people are like, hey, should I start this business? I'm like, oh man, I don't know if you want to. It's like a different reaction, which is so uninspiring, but it's hilarious because now we know what the journey is like.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. We have been jaded. We're on the other side of the fence now, Ali, as old men just going,
it's like,
you shouldn't try. It's very hard.
You'll hurt your hip.
That's right.
It's an interesting one. So I think it's like with all things in life, though. I think it's very impressive when people do something for a 10 or 20 year period and they keep rocking up to the plate. Like I'm always impressed by people like LeBron James, who's been playing basketball at that highest level for 20 years. It's like he knows what he's in for every single year and how brutal it will be, but he still rocks up the same way every time. And I think that it's simple, but it's so difficult to be able to replicate that.
That speaks to the importance of being able to keep yourself inspired. Like what it sounds like just to me is that you and I have not found that next thing that is really inspiring us. Do you know what I mean? It's like inspiration is something that people, again, it can seem one of those things where it seems very, very woo-woo, right? But it's you've got to have something that inspires you, that drives you. Whereas those people like LeBron James you're talking about, their source of inspiration is strong. Whereas if you don't focus on trying to find what that source of inspiration is, sure, you can have discipline, sure, you can have routine, you can have all of these things in play. But if you don't have a strong source of inspiration, then you kind of start to just flounder, right? You kind of just start to go, who cares? And I have to say, to have a bit of awareness for myself, I do have to ensure that I find a stronger source of inspiration moving into 2021. Because sure, I also need to get my discipline and all these things mapped out. But to me, I also have to find a source of inspiration that gets me feeling what these guys felt. That having inspiration isn't something that's automatic. It takes effort, just like how, I'm learning through marriage as well that, having a great marriage isn't something that just happens. Shit, you have to work at it. So to me, these are the key areas that, especially for me, entrepreneurially, I need to find. Yeah, I need to tap into a stronger source of inspiration.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool point because it's easier when things are new and you're at the start. I feel it's interesting when you're maybe midway through the journey or 70% through it, is because then you can fall into the trap of always trying to search for something that's going to fill that void of excitement. And like to me, that's what it feels at the moment. It's like it becomes more of a contentment game around really enjoying the journey that's happening rather than then searching all the time for the next thing that's going to get that dopamine hit of entrepreneurship. But who knows? Like I also agree. Like this time of the year again, going back to that, given that we're doing our Christmas episode, is I always love the end of the year because you get to really finish it off. It feels like it's completing a chapter, and then it's nearly a renewed time to then find that, all right, like really sit down and reflect on what's going to be that inspiration for the next 12 months and what does that look like? I think that's why the whole New Year's resolution thing is such a big thing. Like people wait until this fresh start of the chapter to be like, oh, well, I'm going to change my life because I've now got this. I've finally taken stock of the thing that I want to change. and I'm going to commit to it.
I know there's a huge culture of people out there who say, "Why wait? Do it now." You know, like the David Goggins guy. He's just so crazy.
Yeah,
you can't hurt me. You got to do it now. I'm like, well, no, I'll just wait till New Year's, mate. You know, what's wrong with you? You're so angry all the time.
That book made me feel so inferior. I'm like,
I was like, everything is so angry. Everything is so, there's just so much intensity. I just went, or you could just have an ice cream and take it easy. And, you know, we'll go hard, but we'll also take it easy too.
There was definitely a 2-week period where when the lazy part of my brain would come into action, I'd be like, no, Goggins, I could hear his voice in the back of my head, like, just go and do this. Don't put it
is valuable. It is valuable because yesterday I wasn't going to exercise and then I punished myself for being lazy.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, then so like at 10 o'clock at night, I was on my Peloton bike, sweating it out just because I was like, I'm going to punish the lazy version of me.
Well, Vin Goggins.
Yeah, Vinnegans. Vinnegans. Yeah, I like that. Well, what you said before, I really liked, and that, you see, because I know the danger of entrepreneurship as well is being addicted to those dopamine highs. Like, I bet you that Gabby and Hezi right in here, I bet you that they're now sitting going, oh, I want to experience that. Maybe they're already working on something, but it's like, I bet that they feel that void. I bet because this is the problem of being able to move at such velocity is you want to feel that gravitational force again. You want to feel that force of driving fast again. Mm-hmm. That there's a withdrawal that happens. Mm. And if they're not working on something big again, or maybe they've been able to reach a level of enlightenment that you and I don't know about, but I bet there's that void of going, oh man, I miss those late nights. I miss those waking up in the mornings and, you know, seeing the result of what you did last night. It's just, because I didn't experience what they experienced, right? In terms of, you know, making $1 million overnight. But what I did experience was going to town, working super hard on a Wednesday night, all of Wednesday and a Wednesday night into the early hours of Thursday, and then going to bed. And because I work with clients in the US, when I go to bed is when the US wakes up. To me, one of the most exciting things was when you wake up and then you check your inbox. And then you did, 33 outreaches via a really time-intensive lead generation tactic. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, 2 of them replied. And that was the most exciting thing ever. Like, to me, the most exciting thing was dragging the inbox down and it says downloading 26 emails and then 24 of them are spam and then 2 of them are from your efforts.
Yeah.
That was the most exciting thing to me. And then I got to a point in my business where you drag it down and, it's like 74 emails. Again, 26 of them are spam, but then there's like 40 opportunities opening up.
Yeah.
That to me was so exciting. It was just,
Well, you're talking about immediate feedback there, right? You did something and then you get feedback on it. And I think that's something a lot of people crave, that when you're working on something very long-term horizon or very big, it takes a lot of time to get that return bit of feedback for your efforts. Whereas with very much startup style entrepreneurship, if you put something out there, you know whether it works or not pretty quickly. It happens at a small scale, but I still remember that too. Like, my favorite thing about the entrepreneurial journey was early on where we'd get a PayPal notification of a sale coming through because of this like crazy idea that was put out there. And you get that feeling. And every time you then try a different strategy or an offer, and then you'd get 3 come through or 4 come through. It's nuts how much bigger that would be than even, say, now, maybe taking 6 months to negotiate one big deal. It's like, that's awesome, but it doesn't have the same level of dopamine because it's such a long drawn out thing with, so many variables and takes longer.
But that's so true, because I get more of a dopamine hit from those small transactions as opposed to, I had a few big projects happen this year that took 6 months to close. And then when it closed, I didn't even really feel that excited anymore. Yeah, but it was like the biggest deal I've ever closed, right? It was like, it just, at the end of it, you just go, oh yeah, it was good. Yep.
Yeah.
No, it was awesome.
You're exhausted because you've been.
Yeah. Whereas the other little deals that you got, you act so pumped, and it was like, yeah, but it was a much smaller deal in comparison. And
yeah,
you're right. But that's why entrepreneurial journeys are so exciting early on, is because it's those little wins.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
there's some kind of insight there. It's that, yeah.
Yep. I like this one. I don't know where we'll go with this conversation, but I highlighted it. The lesson: when somebody offers you a great deal, say yes and work out the rest later.
Yeah, that's a good one. That came up multiple times. Yeah.
I love it. I don't even know how we explore that or not, because it nearly just says what it is, but it's just such a great line.
I'm just trying to think on it for a second. Because I've done this so many times on my journey.
Yeah.
It's like I can relate to the first time I had the opportunity to speak. It was like, they asked me, hey, can you speak at this event? And I just went, yeah, definitely. And then I spent the next 2 weeks having anxiety, stressing out, writing the talk, throwing it away, and then delivered something that was actually terrible. But it's like, it's true. It's say yes, then worry about it later.
Mm.
Well, there's a point there. And it's that, sometimes what this is speaking to is, say yes when it's something that is a big it's huge, because when you say yes, now you're forcing yourself to stretch. Because if you don't, and I think a lot of people do pass up opportunities. I've seen people in my life that are close to me pass up opportunities because they say the words, I'm not ready for it. Because they have an illusion that they will be ready for something. And the reality is, you're never ready for anything. You're just not. And the moral of that story is, you have to do things before you're ready. There's an undercurrent in that lesson, and it's that, do things before you're ready. Say yes before you're ready. And I think that makes it a very valuable takeaway, because how many people out there are waiting before they're ready, before they write a book? How many people are waiting before they're ready, waiting for them to be ready to start a new career? And I really believe that, because I'm in an industry where everyone who's a keynote speaker writes a book. I really should be writing a book. I really should be doing that process. And it took one of my best mates, Matthew, to go, no, Vin, let's write a book together. And when he said, let's write a book together, I'm like, yes. Now we'll do it, because we're doing it together.
Yeah.
And because I wouldn't do it, because I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to write a book. I don't have anything to say.
Yeah.
Whereas
you've had 5-6 years where people have been asking you to write a book, and
I know, and I just keep saying no. I just go no, because I'm not ready. So to me, I still suffer from this, and I take it away as, do things before you're ready. So you know what? I'm going to just quickly type down for myself, what are the things you're going to do before you're ready?
Notes on your own podcast. I'm
taking notes. 2021. And the question is, what are you going to do before you're ready in 2021? Like, I'm going to go 3 things I'm going to do before I'm ready. 3 things.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. And this is an interesting concept, because if you look at a lot of the theory at the moment, there's probably 2 schools of thoughts, especially in the entrepreneurial world. One is, say no to everything first, and then use that as a filtering system to find the real big yeses. And then there's the other thought, which is, say yes to everything, and then filter it out as you then go down that journey. So I look at this one more as the answer is both. It's nearly like, what's the list of stuff that you need to say yes to where you might not necessarily be ready? And then what's the bit that you need to still say no to free up the space for the items that you've said yes to? And I feel like simplicity is the thing here. Like what you said there, I'm going to have 3 things. Whereas it can get very easy where people just become full no people, where then they end up doing nothing, because it nearly gets too disconnected, or they can become two full yes people where they say yes to everything and it gets really overwhelming.
I've become a no man this year. No man. Yeah. But I have. I thought I said nomad. That's right. No, but I think I've been very focused this year and saying no a lot. Mm-hmm. I've said no a lot this year. And yeah, it's interesting to start opening yourself up to more opportunities and start saying yes more. It's an interesting balance, like you said. It's like one is accelerate and one is the brake, right? Yep. You have to know when to accelerate and when to put on the brakes too. Because if you say yes all the time, you just become so scatterbrained.
Well, I think what you're showing there is pretty good self-awareness. So it's like, all right, well, I've gone hard on the no, and now I'm feeling like I want to try a few new things on the yes side.
But the things that I say yes to, I have to keep in mind, and I think most of us have to keep in mind that when you're saying yes again, you're saying yes, but you won't feel ready. Mm. You're just not going to feel ready, and that's okay. You have to remember that being ready is it's truly an illusion, and it's something they said in their book too, which I remember. They say that if your idea is perfect and you launched it, it was too late. Mm. It's too late already.
Yeah, it's true.
I have that problem. It's such an interesting, again, why it's an art form, right? It's why you say it's such an art form, this game of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Well, what's something that you're going to do, Ali, before you're ready?
Something I'm going to do.
Do you have something you're going to do before you're ready?
On the list at the moment? No, nothing that comes to mind at the moment. Not right now. But I think you speaking about it is... And again, I think I need to question this, because if I look at it, maybe playing it a bit too comfortable at the moment might be the thing that I've got to then explore a little bit more. And it's funny to say that, I think, in the year that we've had, but it feels like it's time to then start exploring the new a little bit more than what it was over the last, say, 6 months or so. Whereas it's nearly a little bit too content in ways.
Okay, we keep having the conversation of, do you seek out the 9 out of 10s and then suffer from the 1 out of 10, or do you live at a constant 6 or 7? Right?
Yeah.
What if the answer to that is, in a year, we should experience all of it?
Yeah, for sure.
So aim for the 9 and the 10, suffer through the 1, then come back to a middle of a 6 or a 7, and then coast with a level of 4 or a 5 for a bit. I feel like when you're planning out the year, it should include all of it. Mm. I don't feel like it.
I like that.
I don't think life is simple enough to always just aim for a 5 or a 6, because then that to me is boring. That would be a boring year. To me, sure. You've got to have the peaks, you've got to have the troughs, you've got to have all of it. Mm-hmm.
So I really like what you said then. There was, I can't remember where I read it, but it was an entrepreneur who has, when they set KPIs, they set the other side of the KPI as well. You know, so what that means is, say, for example, if they're setting a gross profit KPI, which is around optimizing operating efficiencies or whatever it might be, they will also then set what's going to be the impact on, say, customer satisfaction, because we're then optimizing. So you have the positive and the negative of that, both sides. Whereas I think when we set goals and KPIs, we only set them on the upside. We don't look at the trade-off or what the alternative impact is going to be. You know, if the goal is to start your business, then you probably need to then set the alternative KPI of reduction in time with family or whatever it is, to then get a clear picture of, all right, well, I'm now getting both sides of it. So I really like what you said there around, it's nearly like you plan the 10s, the 1s, the 3s, the 7s, whereas we only plan the 10s.
We do.
Or the 8s or whatever it is. We don't really plan for the other bits that inevitably make up life, which is a really, really cool concept.
Well, it just feels like when you're planning, you need to ensure there are 10s. You need to ensure there are times when it does feel mundane, because routine is important. Balance is important. You know, you've got to mow the lawn. You've got to wash the car. You've got to do the laundry. You know, there are things that you have to do, because if you're just aiming for 10s, maybe you're just going to be severely disappointed. Or if you're just aiming for 5s and you feel like you're just settling.
Yeah.
And you know what I realize what this podcast almost is that we're doing in you saying that is that I feel like you and I, we go read a book and then we're trying to update our operating system, which is our heads. And then we jump on and have a conversation with this new patch that we've just applied to our operating system. Yeah. And then through this discussion, we're realizing the things we've learned through reading the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like this podcast really should be called, it should be just called like a patch update.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
iOS update version.
Yeah, it's like it's 9. But that's what I realized, because while you were talking, it just gave me clarity. That's what this is. It's you and I going away, learning from a book, and then coming together, just talking about it, going, what has this patch done for you? What has this patch done for me? Which is really cool. I really like that.
Yep. I think it's...
I really like it.
Going back to, things not ready for. I think I've got a couple of ideas now as we were speaking too. So one that I'm going back. I think the real good question is, what have you been putting off that has been on the list for a while that hasn't been done?
That's a good question.
I've had 2 that have, I reckon, been sitting there for a while. One has been doing a 10-day silent meditation retreat.
Oh, frightening, dude.
Yeah, it scares the shit out of me. So that would be one that's been on the list. And
10
I've actually
days?
Yeah. I've booked in for it twice and I've had to bail twice because of travel.
Can't you start with like 3 days?
Yeah, no, I think just go into 10 is the one, because that's the one that's scary. So that's one that I think I need to do this year coming up. Would be that. And then the other is a proper fitness challenge. I've never given physical fitness the level of exertion where I could say that I've tested myself really high on that scale. Like outside of maybe cold showers and seeing how many push-ups I can do in one breath or something like that. Like nothing serious over a prolonged time that was, over a 30-day, 90-day period where it makes me feel uncomfortable. So maybe those 2 stand out. What about you?
Oh, I just still can't shake off that feeling of the 10-day silent thing. That sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, it's meant to be a pretty full-on experience.
And it sounds frightening. Things I'm not ready for. I think the book is definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready for it, but a good friend of mine is pulling me into it and I'm doing it with him, which is really fun. So that to me is one of them. The next thing for me is something I'm not ready for. I'm going to have to sit on that more.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's why I wrote it down. I'm going to come up with 3 things that I'm going to do before I'm ready next year.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got a New Year's Eve episode planned, so let's
that'll be fun.
Back and think on a couple of these when we have our plans for 2021 and reviews done a little bit more. That'll be interesting.
Another thing that's related to what we're saying is that one of the lessons that the brothers talk about is they go, if you've got 10 great ideas, 9 of them will be the enemy of the best one.
Yeah.
So again, that's a big thing, right? As we're going into the next year, that everyone's going to have so many ideas. And when you read what they wrote, 9 of them will be the enemy of that one. So it's like you've got 10 of these great ideas. And among all of them, one of them is the good idea. But while that one's a good idea, the rest is trying to blind you. The rest is almost like, no, don't listen to that good idea. I'm the best idea. That's frightening, dude. So right now, it's almost like you and I are potentially sitting on one really good idea, but the rest are trying to cloud your judgment.
Yeah. Well, I think you just summed up life though. isn't that the game of growth and progress? It's like fighting through that, like, you're like wading through mud to get to the end where that one good bit sits. I think with new things, especially that exist, those conditions are always there.
I wish we could ask them how were they able to get rid of the 9 enemies?
Yeah,
I mean, through that. I mean, this is my thought. The only way you can identify if they're an enemy or not is to try. I mean, if you placed all 10 strategies in front of me, the only way is to solve for X. Take the first idea, plug it in, and going, was that good? Did that have legs? Was that a good idea? That's the only real way. There's no magical idea or magical lesson I can share that's going to allow you to go, oh, it's option 7. There's no way. Yeah. There's no way.
Well, it's like with anything in life nearly, and we'll get philosophical again, but objectively, there is no such thing that exists as making the correct choice. You know how we always say it? We're like, I made the right decision or I made the correct choice. It's like, well, that is not a truth. Yeah, there is no, like, unless you knew every single variable that you could have picked from, and then you were able to like put it through an algorithm that then confirmed that you made the correct choice. Right. It's essentially a lie every single time we say that, oh, well, I made the right choice at the time. I made the correct choice. Like, that's just us giving ourselves a feeling of.
You've ruined so many of my good choice comments that I've made for myself.
Well, and we like, I'm not saying that I don't do it. I do it all the time, right? Like, and I remember sitting there saying with the pandemic, and I was like talking to, I think, Chantel about it. And I'm like, it felt like we made, so many of the right choices that we had to make. And I think, and she was like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, damn it, Chantel. I'm like, yeah, all right. And I'm like, good. Yeah, okay. I was trying to just have a little moment of like confirmation that we played the game to some level. And it's like, and then you think about it, it's like, yeah, well, when I actually look back on it, there's not really any choices there that I can categorically say were the correct choice. They were maybe
it's almost like we say it's a good choice to, just the self-comfort. Just go, it was a good choice. We made the right decision.
We made the right decision, but I mean,
right. So what you're saying, it's true. But then why do we label things as being a good choice or a bad choice? Why do we label it? We label it because, first of all, human beings, our need to label things and our need for things to make sense. Because if nothing makes sense, nothing is anything, then we just break down.
Yeah.
But it's interesting viewing it that way. Yeah. Well, it's an outcome that came from that choice. If an outcome is somewhat positive, we label it as being a good choice. If an outcome is somewhat negative, we label it as being a bad choice. However, nothing is truly a good outcome or a bad outcome because we don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be, right? Because a negative outcome from today's choice can actually create a greater outcome in the future. Now we're getting into some deep weeds.
Yeah, we're going deep. We're going in the rabbit hole.
It's like, for me, I just feel like, again, me failing in an earlier business when I was young and failing in more subsequent businesses has led me to being where I am today. So bad choices led me to ultimately a good choice, but then good choices could ultimately lead you to a bad choice, like to ultimately bad thing. So
here's my solution to it is I just view everything as a good choice. It's just the easiest way to go about it. It's like, because because I think what you've just touched on there is it's about nearly emotional narrative and meaning. We're trying to make sense of this story. So I think internally, if you could just view it all as a good choice and add the silver lining to it, because say somebody dies it's like, well, that's a really bad outcome. But then what's the positive spin? It's like, well, they lived a great life. They had so much time, learned so much from that person. They freed up some more space for other people. You know, like it's like, that was a very terrible.
That was really they're taking up less space on this earth, eating less food, breathing less of the air.
That was dark. That was dark.
But it's the truth, right? It is the truth. It's in terms of what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's always two ways to look at every choice you make. Just choose the positive way of looking at it.
Well, yeah, or learn from the negative, or even if it is negative, like how can you turn it into a positive? Like I love that we did it in Green Lights, the Matthew McConaughey's book it was red, yellow, and green lights, and ultimately everything can become a green light. You know, and I think to me, I love that as a fundamental part of the operating system where it just seems more manageable from a mental state and energy perspective. It's like, well, all right, pandemic happens. Awesome. What a great opportunity to learn from a pandemic rather than trying to go through or living or sitting too much into the negative side of that experience. Because it could be like, I sold my business for $1 billion, you know, and you could be like, worst decision that I ever made. Well, I've now got $1 billion that I can't use. Like all my friends and family, like you can put a negative spin on anything. And if we can do a negative spin on anything, why can't we put a positive spin on anything?
It's a really good point. And if there's always two sides to a coin, why not just focus on one side of it? I mean, be aware of the other side, but focus on the other side of the coin. I like that. I mean, it leads to the point that another point they wrote was they wrote something about you've got to kiss lots of frogs before one of them turns into a princess.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And again, this whole theme of trial and error just runs all throughout it. So to me, one very big message from this book is keep trying. You know, what these boys are telling us is, what these brothers are telling us is just keep trying.
Yeah.
And that's what I find is consistent with you and I, is that we just keep trying. And then I found that to be really a useful skill for me, especially when I found myself to be a little bit unhappy. I just went, well, I'm just going to keep trying new things. I'm just going to keep trying different things. Like I hired a motorhome, you know, and that was one of the greatest things I did was I was able to switch off for a period of 4 to 5 days and just go on the road and be out in nature, you know? And so I'm looking at this book now as almost a book that I'm going to go through and read through all my highlights again, because it's a way of life. It's a way of living. It's a way of being. And this one is one that really hit home for me. It's, if you're the boss, you make the rules. Don't sentence yourself to another shitty job.
That's a great one.
How good is that?
Yeah.
I lost track of that. Hey?
It's good if you're the boss.
Yeah, it is good if you're the boss. And this is the bosses out there, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs create a shitty job for themselves. And I could very easily do that for myself. And I think come very close to doing that for myself as well. So when I read that, I was like, that is such a good reminder for me. And to those who are the bosses, is that don't create another crap job for yourself. You know, it's I love that so much.
Yeah, it's nearly going back to that saying of like, entrepreneurs will work 24 hours a day just for the freedom of not working for somebody else. And I think that's something that happens where, that's a really interesting concept, I think, especially when leading teams, because a lot of people that go down the route of entrepreneurship, it's to design their own world and their own vision and to then see that happen. But it's very interesting because, say, for example, a big driver for many is to get life flexibility, right? Like you create your own ecosystem. Like you look at so many of the recent entrepreneurs in the past 5-10 years, it's escaped the corporate job to then go do something that they're passionate about and to work within. But it's very, I think, difficult as a leader to sit there, because I think deep down, there's a lot of that think when you're leading a team or you own a business or whatever it might look like, where this has got to be around my lifestyle, I'll set the rules. But it's hard to make that work in practice because if you're a relatively small team, it does have a negative impact if you've got one person living by the rules that they've set. But then for the business to operate, it requires a completely different set of rules. And finding that balance and finding the right people to make that work so it doesn't then have a negative impact is, I think, something very interesting. And I haven't seen it done successfully too many times. And even if you look at these guys, I would nearly call them out on that one where I don't think, I think they set the rules, but they were the ones that drove the rules of extreme work ethic. Like if you look at the stories in there, like there's a story I think of when Natty became the CEO, and rather than getting somebody in to build the sign, like he painted the sign. Now, to me, that seems like that's culturally aligned with what Gabby and Hezi would have done. You know, so having that mentality of we'll just do whatever it takes to get it done. Where theirs doesn't feel like a story where they were the owners and they just put in the team and then let it happen that way. It was more like, I think they say it in another part of the book, is that they were the ones there on weekends. And I think that's something that I've learned a little bit more over the journey as well. It's if you're in the business as an owner, say in any sort of day-to-day role, unless you completely detach yourself as that owner and you put in a management team or whatever it looks like, I don't think you can have separate rules where you play it one way and then the team plays it another way. I haven't seen it done successfully yet. I've heard one story. I think it was the guy that founded Intrepid Tours. And I remember him speaking, and he had like a rule where he'd take 3 months off a year, and that seemed to work pretty well. But I don't think the rest of the team got to take 3 months off a year to travel. But he would do that. I think him and the business partner would do it. They'll do 3 or 6 months every year. And that seemed to work pretty well, maybe because it's culturally aligned. But
I think one of those things, I mean, I said that don't create another shitty job for yourself. I meant that in, I guess, my context where you're solo entrepreneurs, right? If you're like a big team, you're right. It just doesn't work. It just kind of falls apart, right?
Yeah. In your world, you have to create it exactly how you want it. You've got.
But I fall into the illusion. I sometimes fall into the illusion that I have to, it's funny because I keep saying these things to my wife. Like often I'll say to Pei Wen, I have to go do this now. And then every now and then she goes, do you have to, or do you want to? And I was like, oh God, damn it. It's like, well, I don't have to, I should. And then it's like, well, where does this should come from? And I was like, why do wives always do this? My wife in particular always do this. She always can say things that cause the screen of blue death. The blue screen of death on a computer, I'm just I'm there going, I don't know what to say.
I need to reset the computer. Just give me 5 minutes.
Just walk away and then just come back. Hi, can we just have that conversation again? But it's true is that I always feel like I should do things or I have to do things, but in actual fact, I don't.
Let's explore this. You saying that literally before this podcast, me and Chantel had the conversation. It's like, well, why are you doing a podcast on Christmas Eve? And I'm like, well, and the true answer is it's because I want to. And that was where we got to, and we don't.
I also got that from Pei Wen.
And when you say it, like it was nearly when this morning, because I'd kind of held off it. It's like, well, I thought you guys did the podcast the other day. Which was also when you were like, you kind of meant to be doing Christmas time. And what I realized, I had to put my hand up. Like, I am horrible around this time of the year. Like, I don't know what happens, but I get into a zone where I don't know if it's all the family commitments, like doing social activities, everyone being around, but it just puts me into a different zone where always just trying to look for like that little escape out, and I've just been called out on it year on year where
too.
Where there's one side of me that's then like, oh, I just can't wait to just spend so much family time and do all of this. And then there's the other part where it's like, oh, I just wouldn't mind 2 hours just to go and sit at the cafe and journal for a little bit or whatever. And I really am struggling with how to deal with it. So if anyone has any advice on how to deal with Christmas time, well, as a good human being, please share that.
I think this comes because there's a part of me, DNA wise, that's a workhorse.
Yeah.
And when you tell a workhorse to enjoy and indulge in the festive season, it freaks workhorses out.
Unplug, relax.
Yeah, because I got into trouble too. Like, I mean, not into trouble, but last night people was like, so why did you do it on Christmas Eve? And to me, it was because I checked the diary and there was nothing there. And then I said to Ali, are you free on 24th? And he's like, yeah, man, my diary's clear too. And I was like, yeah, well, let's plug it in. So it's like, to me, I'm scared of empty space on my calendar.
Yeah, same.
Right. And I like to fill it with things. So to me, it's so hilarious that you and I both got into trouble for doing this. That's so funny.
I made the mistake of, I'm like nearly saying, well, what else did we have planned?
Yeah, that's right. The same thing.
I don't know, man. It's recorded. They're gonna say this, but maybe this is our way of apologizing for just being very average human beings. And
oh gosh, it's like how not to be husbands. It's hilarious. Well, let's talk about this in a way that hopefully will be fruitful, right? In that, why do you feel? Well, we got onto this because we were saying things you feel like you have to do, but in actual fact, you don't have to do them. I'm going to write another question down for myself. This is great, man. Thanks for helping me do my yearly review. What are things you feel you have to do? And do you really have to do them?
Yeah,
I'm going to assess. I'm going to assess all the things in my life that I feel I have to do. Then I'm really going to analyze it together with my wife as well. That do we really have to do these things? Is that a have to, or is that a you? Like, I'm going to address that. I'm going to check that out. Yeah, I'm going to check it out. I like
this. This is controversial, right? But why do we only do family things around this time of the year? Why doesn't this happen in like August, September, July, where there's like this extravagant celebration?
Why don't we show why don't we show gratitude through presents at other times during the year? Why don't we do that?
Look, why are we buying 80% of the gifts that we're going to buy for each other?
That's a good point. And why is it that we only gather with the people we love most in our lives during this time?
You're helping me figure it out, because this feels like one of these things that is a norm. And I get in trouble potentially if you question the norms. Like to me, it feels like we're riding. Maybe it's the immature, rebellious, break the rules side of it. Where,
but here's the thing: it almost feels like you are. It's okay to not do family things all throughout the year, and then you just make up for it right at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it perfectly, then it's like a check mark against it.
Well, because it only happens once a year. So if it only happens once a year, so if you don't do it right, then, it's true. There's a lot of pressure riding on it.
There's heaps of pressure on it. And it's like, all right, well, and how do you then get the clarity? Like, what's the correct amount of energy, bandwidth, time that then ticks that box that did Christmas well? It's a bit like, I go back to the marriage construct. It feels, and again, controversial slightly, but it's like this whole thing around how you have this, like people when they're dating and they're engaged, like the relationship traditionally has this level of like freedom and autonomy and fluidity. And then the marriage happens and then the contract's signed. And then it's like, well, now we can say whatever we want to each other. We can behave like this. It's locked in as a long-term, somewhere between 30 and 90-year agreement, depending on how long Elon Musk can figure out for us to live. But it's this concept of like structure, right? And it's like, does this make it a more enjoyable experience? Because when I look around Christmas time or the holiday period, it's like I was speaking to another friend and they were talking about having to go interstate to see a family member and stuff. And they're like, oh, I've got to do it. But I'm kind of glad that Sydney's got cases because I know there's certain things that are happening within the family at the moment that are going to get brought up, and like it's like this notion of
but maybe those problems are problems because we don't get together enough to have opportunities to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then it's done, like, because then like a whole extended family will come together in this intense block.
See, that's the thing. Like that's the thing that I've been able to do well with my family is that my family and I, and almost like you and I, Ali, isn't this weird, right? That you and I just last call said, hey man, we should actually set up like a 1 or 2 hour call once a week between us. We haven't been doing it. And we were like, hey, let's create those windows for connection. And I can tell you the same thing happens for my family. Like my close group knit of friends and I, especially my cousins, when we don't see each other for about 5 days, it feels weird.
Yeah.
So like we'll go out of our ways after that just to come have dinner together because we're like, oh, we miss you guys so much. So to me, it's you're right. It's important for us to question the norm. You take entrepreneurship and apply it to life.
All right. Here's the thing that stands out.
Yeah.
We kind of know where we're at with this. How do we make it so it's optimal? Like, because then that's where my head went to, because when we finished our conversation, I made kind of like the internal commitment. It's like, all right, as soon as this podcast is done, I am actively going to be the best that I could be for the next few days in light of that. But I still don't have the clarity around, all right, what does that then mean? Is it just presence? And this is where I think you've got the better advantage being communication guru and expert, is how do you, and maybe it's I don't know if it's an entrepreneurial thing, if it's a guy thing, if it's whatever this is, drop some wisdom for us, Vin, to get locked in and connected during the holiday period. Because ultimately my goal is to make this period of time really enjoyable for those around me. But I'm not sure whether from an action perspective, if I'm doing that to the level that I should be doing it.
I feel like for me, and this isn't for everyone, but I feel like for me, it's going to be a complete, first of all, unplug from this.
Uh-huh.
It has to be a complete disconnect from this. Has to be. Like I want over the next week with my family to keep that down to almost zero if I can. So get rid of that is the first step for me, because then it will allow me to be fully, and this is going to sound so trite and gross, but it's really about being present.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is for me. It's for me not to think about work. My thoughts need to be about my family and myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my headspace needs to live.
Yep.
And I can't think of another word besides from being present.
Yep. Do you have any like
Christmas is all about presence?
Yeah, it's about presence at the fundamental level as well.
Really
Do you have any tips like around from an energy or communication standpoint? Because I know that's stuff that I was thinking about, where like, is there a mindset shift as well that's required?
There is. Well, for me, there is. But this is for me throughout the year. And it's that when you communicate, you can either communicate with energy or without energy. You can either communicate with emotion or without emotion. You can communicate, with enthusiasm or without enthusiasm. And I think often when people think of generosity during this time, they think of generosity in terms of presence, and they think of generosity sometimes with time, the amount of time I spend with people. But people don't think about generosity in terms of energy. And I think during this period, and for me, this is what I believe every time you communicate, is give that communication emotional energy and give it energy, vibrance. Be generous in that sense too. Be generous with the way you communicate. And use your voice to actually spread joy. Use your voice to spread cheer. You know, it's something I feel we forget about. Yesterday, I went to pour petrol with my dad, and I just had this petrol person, this gas attendant, petrol person. But the way they said Merry Christmas to me was beautiful. You know, it wasn't, most people when they serve you just go, oh yeah, Merry Christmas. Whereas this person was like, hey, and have a Merry Christmas. You know, it was really kind of loud and crazy. And I went, oh, wow, man, that's awesome. I was like, yeah, and Merry Christmas to you too. Wow, that was such a beautiful way of saying it. Whereas I think it's so easy during this time to get locked in the way we communicate. Oh, I'm obliged to talk to people. Okay, so yeah, you know, how's the kids? How's the family? Be present and I think give generosity with the way you're talking. Be generous with the way you're talking. You know, infuse the way you communicate. Infuse it with just give it energy. Don't be so lazy with it.
Yeah. Well, it's like this is nearly a practice to me, it feels like. Like if I look at it, it's something that nearly becomes like a behavior. It's a behavior change, a habit change. You know, we've spoken about it. I know you speak about it when you do your course where you're like, well, we go to work and we give this level of where we're at. Even with this podcast, for example, like Chantel listens to every episode of this because she gets to see a side of us in this zone, you know, which is pretty cool. And like, even from a connection standpoint, sometimes she'll be like, well, get to connect with you differently through the podcast than what we would on a day-to-day basis. Like wouldn't be talking about these things, or we wouldn't be talking about that because life's happening during that period. And I remember you really highlighting this to me a few years ago where it was, well, why do we give this level when we're in our work life? But then like my default nearly became, all right, well, I've got to finish off the work. You have to do this, this, and this. I've got 8 things on the to-do list. I've got to get then gifts. I've got to wrap them up. I've got all these bits and pieces. But in doing that, the actual most important part of being connected is then not happening, which I'm glad we discussed this live. So at least the notion there that it wants to change and that it's something that's acknowledged, I think is always the first step. Then it's about execution, right?
Well, I mean, I think we all suffer from this. Even I do too. There are times when I forget that I can give with the way that I communicate. You can give. I mean, when people say someone is caring, when people say someone is kind or compassionate or loving, they're talking about the way in which you just said the things you've said. Did it sound loving? Did it sound compassionate? Did it sound kind? And again, I just can't get over how the person said Merry Christmas. I've never had anyone say Merry Christmas to me like that. You know, he's like that man thought he was Santa Claus. And it was freaking awesome. You know, and it immediately gave me this jolt of joy. So I think during this time of the year, we all have the capacity to be generous with presents. We have capacity to be generous with the time we spend with our families. But let's also be generous with the way we use our voice. Let's be generous with the energy that we give each other. And let's be generous to not only our family members, but whoever we come in contact with, whoever you come into contact with during this time. Be generous with the energy you can give them in the 3 seconds you have when you say thank you. And in the way you say Merry Christmas, in the way you say Happy New Year, you know, say it in a way that will give them some life and give them some joy.
I really like that. That's my note that I'll be writing down, mental note of the next, especially this, I guess, holiday period is going in there. And I think it's a cool thing to review. Like, how often do we review where we ranked personally on levels of generosity, call it like heart connection, joy, making people laugh, lighting people up? But I think that's a cool KPI for next year too, is those moments where,
well, I was just going to say it's one thing. It's one thing that these guys talk about. Hezi and Gabby is that they say being funny is a very important skill set.
Yeah, in business it is. People do business with people they like. It's just the truth.
But I like that you are thinking about tracking that.
Yeah, I want a report. I'm going to give Chantel, like, I want a rating at the end of today and tomorrow, of how it's stacked up. The goal will be to get a 8 out of 10 or above. I'm feeling like naturally I'd get about a 5. So I think gamifying even this, why not?
But that's a really good point. That's inspired me to want to be better during this period as well. Yeah. And
you're
for me,
you're going to be a 10.
But I know that for me being a 9 or a 10 to my family is for me to completely get away from this.
That's cool. I think it's a great move.
I think we all have, whereas I use my voice, Ali, like, I don't have the problem of being lazy with my voice, but to me, I think we all have demons that rob us of being able to bring happiness to those that we love, whether it's your customers or your family. And I think having more self-awareness as to what's causing you to be a 5 is really important right now on Christmas Eve. And it's funny we're talking about that as we're doing a podcast and not being with our families. That's hilarious. but at least doing this is helping us being more aware of what we need to do less of. We're planning it. We're planning it. But to me, if you can become aware of what's robbing you of being present, what's robbing you of doing the things that you should be doing. Because that's the thing. Here's the reality, right? We learned this in Brene Brown's podcast. It's not that people don't know how to be better husbands or better wives or to be better children, to be their parents or to be better entrepreneurs. It's not that we don't know how to do those things. The how is easy. Just go to Google, find out. It's very fast. I don't think it's a lack of the know-how or the knowledge. It's the things that get in the way of the how. It's what's getting in the way of that. And to me, one of the things that gets in the way of the how is this. So you almost have to think to yourself too, Ali, what's getting in the way of you giving more of yourself? And it could be like what you said. Maybe it's a health thing. Maybe it's an energy management thing. Maybe it's one of those things that you didn't think of. So I think what this book has taught me, so as we sum up, is that I have been treating my personal life different, and I've been treating entrepreneurship different. What Gabby and Hezi have really highlighted for me, maybe unintentionally, is that this game that I'm good at, entrepreneurship, I can apply some of the rules that I've learned in this game into my life. And there's a lot that I can benefit from gamifying almost my personal life and applying the skills that I have in entrepreneurship into my personal life. I really like that. It's funny. I've had this skill all along, but I've just never really applied it to my own personal life.
I think it's a beautiful knowledge bomb to wrap it up.
What about for you? What about for you?
The bit that stood out for me is, if people are looking at exploring this game of entrepreneurship or this art form, is I think stories like this, how these guys have documented and shared this so generously, are really important, because I think there's a lot of people that can resonate to this story and potentially use it as a framework to then replicate it. And I look at my deeper understanding, which was the unintentional outcome of this was, and we spoke about this briefly the other day, it was getting back to curiosity. Like we talked about, even you talking about the 7s and all of that. I think if I look at 2021 is I want to really tap that curious part of this game and life, like really getting time and space to find things that I'm curious about that have that. And when I talk about curiosity, it's things that I want to learn about a little bit more, and I think that's been a real theme even in this session that we've been discussing, is those things that we're not ready about, the things that we've been putting off for a while, the things that we're interested in, new passions. And nearly rewriting the next chapter from a very fresh start in many ways.
Yeah.
So that would be mine. And then just the tip for people that are maybe looking at the game of entrepreneurship, it's do what Hezi did. Like, start small. Just take the action, give it a crack. Like that line around, what was it? The midnight line, like starting, having the idea at midnight, launching by midday.
Executing.
Like just take the action, give it a crack. Like, and it's such a perfect time of the year to do it. So
I think the way that I want to sum that up for myself is, if you want to play the entrepreneurship game, keep trying to solve for X and don't stop trying to solve for X. And then you'll gradually be able to solve for X. It's just, you have to keep trying. That's what these guys did. They had an idea for what X could be by midnight, and then they plugged it into the formula by noon. And then they checked if it worked. If it didn't, the next evening, they try a different variable. They try a different number again. They solve for X. So to me, this is a great success story of brothers who continually tried to solve for X to the point where they achieved massive success. And hey, cheers to these boys for building something they've built, because as with everything in entrepreneurship, it started with an idea. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? All started with an idea. Wow. Hey, look at this. Look how serendipitous that is. And I'm up to the page on the book right now where I took notes, where the word there literally is idea. Oh,
yeah. There you go.
Magic.
Perfect way.
But look, we do have to get back to our families. Merry Christmas, everyone. I think during this period, if I had to say anything, this is me keeping myself accountable. I'm not going to be on this. I'm going to be with my family. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas, and we'll wait to wish you Happy New Year next. Any final words from you, Ali?
You have summed it up perfectly, my man. Let's get to it. Time to be
Merry
human.
Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
See you in the next one.